Hey, all right, everyone. Thanks for having us. I'm really excited today to come and talk about CodePush, React Native, and kind of what the next step is in this kind of crazy journey we're on. My name is Ryan J. Salva. I'm a Principal Program Manager with the Mobile Developer Tools Division at Microsoft, and I've got with me here Parachute.
Hello everyone, my name is Parshuram and I work with Ryan on building dev tools for JavaScript-based mobile applications. React Native is primarily the focus area that I'm working on these days, and I'm glad to be here talking about the next generation of CodePush and other things.
Rock and roll. All right, cool. Let's get into it. So, I want to just first give you guys a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today. We're, of course, going to talk a little bit about kind of what React Native and CodePush are, just to set some context. But then we want to spend the vast majority of our time actually kind of working with the code and working with the tools and showing you kind of what the product really looks like. Then we're going to wrap it all up with a peek into the future and then give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. Again, throughout, please don't hesitate to kind of type your questions into the chat window. We'll try to answer them as we go along. And yeah, so let's get to it. All right. So just to kind of level set it here about kind of what is React Native. Well, React Native showed up as a hackathon project out of Facebook in summer of 2014. In about 2015 or so, we started to hear more and more of it from developers at about the same time that we were working on Cordova. It was still a young, fresh kid on the block at the time, but developers were really excited about the potential to use JavaScript to create native UI in their apps while still using JavaScript, right? Still actually just kind of coding using kind of the framework that they'd already grown to love in the web world, React.js. Now, while React Native allows you to code in JavaScript, that doesn't mean that your kind of your UI or your APIs are all kind of going to be JavaScript. They're not going to be rendered via a web browser using the DOM like you would find in a web application or a Cordova application where all of it renders in kind of a web view. Instead, what's going to happen is that code is going to execute in JavaScript core and then via a kind of native bridge talk over to your kind of the React Native, the native part of that framework, which will then render kind of regular old kind of toggle switches and sliders and navigation controls on the UI side of things and expose access to device capabilities and native APIs like I don't know, the camera or the address book or the accelerometer, right? So all of this together is going to kind of give you all of the advantages of typical Objective-C or Java or Swift development, but while still staying in kind of that cross-platform world where you can share 70-80% of your code deployed to both iOS, Android, and even Windows, and also at the same time do it in your preferred JavaScript framework of choice. Now, it's not just that you can stay in the language that you love, it's also that you can maintain that same workflow and that same web-like agility that you typically get out of browser-based development. One of the real advantages of React Native development is that you can make a couple of tweaks, edit a kind of a couple lines of what essentially looks like and is kind of CSS, or maybe even modify your app logic, hit save, and get live reload or hot code push or whatever the kind of name is that you choose to use for it today. But what you're essentially getting here is you're getting a quick refresh of your application, of your native application, so that you get fast, incremental, iterative feedback so that you can keep on kind of jiving on your code and not have to wait for a full build to happen and a full deploy to happen. You're not waiting 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes to see feedback. No, instead, 500 milliseconds later, you've got kind of immediate feedback telling you what those changes did to your running application. So, in the context of this, right about that time, maybe kind of mid-2015, Microsoft, my team, was looking around saying, hey, what can we do to bring other good parts of JavaScript development over to React Native? Now, one of the things that we have been tinkering around with in the Cordova space was this thing called CodePush. Essentially what it does is it allows you to update your app without having to redeploy to the server, right? So because all of your app logic exists in this JavaScript package, you can upload that to the cloud, and the devices, like all those many, many devices that are in your end user's hands out there in the world, can ping the cloud and say, hey, cloud, have you got an update for me? Well, yeah, I do. It pulls down or downloads a zip file with kind of all of that JavaScript code, extracts it on the device, and uploads the core logic of your app. This avoids kind of the whole rigmarole that you would typically have to do going through the kind of the app store, where you've got to submit your app and wait for them to take a look at it, make sure it's secure, and kind of whatever else it is that they do in the kind of Apple App Store or the Google Play Store in order to make sure that your app is certified to go out there and be downloaded by the public. Now, you can make updates on your own pace. So if you inadvertently ship a critical breaking bug that is causing a deluge of 1-star reviews, you can quickly respond to that, issue a hotfix, code push it out to all of your end users, and then before it's reached kind of critical mass and everyone has abandoned your app, they're all getting the latest code with the newest fix, or maybe even feature updates that add incremental value to your app without having to resubmit that through the store. Right? So that's super, super helpful, and again, capitalizes on the same advantages that we are accustomed to get out of web development over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Now, a lot of you may be asking yourself, rightfully so, is this totally kosher with the app stores? Well, the answer to that is an unequivocal yes. What you're seeing right here, we've just kind of opened up, is a little snippet from the terms and conditions from the Apple Developer Licensing Agreement. And the highlighted piece here is the important piece. The only exception to the foregoing is scripts and code downloaded and run by Apple's built-in WebKit framework or JavaScript core. What they're saying here is that everything else has got to pass through the App Store. But if you've got JavaScript that's just executing in the DOM or executing in JavaScript core that is in that kind of like background thread, you are hunky-dory A-OK to publish updates. Now, it's worth noting here that that addition, that or JavaScript core piece that's kind of there at the tail end of that phrase, that just got added into Apple's terms and conditions within the last couple of months. So this is Apple essentially acknowledging that a new way of running cross-platform apps has kind of come into being over the course of the last year and a half, 2 years, and they are okay with the kinds of updates and the kind of tactics that we are applying to not only kind of build native apps using JavaScript, but also to update them. So that's super, super cool. Now, CodePush, in the end, is really just a piece of the overall puzzle when you're building an app, right? Your client-side framework, of course, important. React Native does a great job there. CodePush helps leverage some of the advantages of JavaScript-driven development to update your app and help you kind of deliver bug fixes and incremental feature updates to your users faster. But there's so many other kind of services that are required in the kind of the context of app development. You need to be able to build and test and distribute, and you want to be able to do A/B testing. And on the back end, you need to have kind of identity. You need to be able to identify whether it's via social auth or enterprise auth. You need to have data storage. You need to be able to push notifications to your end users. Well, over the course of the last 2 years or so, Microsoft has either acquired or built internally a number of different services that fill all of these holes, whether it is Hockey app for crash reporting, Azure Mobile Engagement for analytics, Azure Mobile App Services for things like identity and push notifications. All of these pieces have a place to play, and what we found is that developers really kind of got tired of going to multiple different places in order to kind of assemble this kind of hodgepodge tool chain to bring it all together to really kind of form a chorus out of many single voices. And so what we've done is this year, we've got a project going on to combine and integrate all of these services into a single solution. We call it Visual Studio Mobile Center. Marketing pitch here, mission control for mobile apps. I didn't come up with it, but it kind of makes sense to me, right? This is the place that you go to kind of fill in all of the gaps in your service layer, your service tier, so that you can deliver a mobile application that works, right? That's fast and easy and allows you to focus on the things that you enjoy most, or at least the things that I enjoy most, which is the coding, right? Okay, so you get an idea of what React Native is. You got an idea of where CodePush is coming from. Let's take a look at the demo. Now, what we're going to do here is Parashu's going to walk you through 5 different steps. We are going to build our application. Once we've built it in the cloud, we're going to kind of hook in crash reporting so you've got a better idea of what the product health is out in market. You know when things are going wrong, right? Then we're going to take a look at analytics, right? So that you not only got a view about the product health, but also a view into user engagement with your app. What views are people using? How are they using them? How often do they come back? Where are they coming from? And what kind of devices are they using? Then we're going to move on to distribute our app, right? This is putting it in the hands of beta testers and clients and people like that, stakeholders who really need to evaluate the quality of the application before we publish it to the store. And then last but not least, we're going to bring it all together with CodePush and show how CodePush, once it is in users' hands, can help you release without going through the App Store, push out bug fixes, and then all of that ties in together with React Native and how we've customized Mobile Center to meet the needs specifically of the React Native developer. All right, sound like a fun time? Excellent, cool, let's get into it.
Thank you, Ryan. So let me switch over to my demo machine here. And for this demo, we'll be creating a React Native application from scratch. So I'm going to use the React Native init command, and I'm going to call my project my React Native app. Once this project is ready, let's get into the project and use Git as our source control system. So I'm going to say git init and use git commit to add all of the files to Git. I'm also going to publish this project on GitHub. So let me head over to my browser and go to github.com and create a new repository. I'm going to call this new repository my React Native app. And once I come back to my terminal, I'm going to add the git remote URL and do git push origin master to publish my code to GitHub. Now that my code is on the cloud, I can use Visual Studio Mobile Center by visiting mobile.azure.com to kickstart the DevOps workflow. So I'm going to head over to Mobile Center and sign in with GitHub. You can also sign in with Microsoft ID or a username password. Once I'm on Mobile Center, I'm going to create 2 new apps, one for each of the platforms that React Native supports. So here, this is the iOS app, and I'm going to select React Native in the platform and say add a new app. I'm going to do the exact same thing for an Android application. You must have noticed that Mobile Center can help you create apps using Java, Objective-C, React Native, or Xamarin C#. So all of those languages or all of those platforms are supported when you're using Mobile Center for building or for setting up the DevOps pipeline. To get the continuous integration setup working, let's head over to build and select the repository that we just uploaded to GitHub. The repository was my React Native app, so I'm going to select that and pick the branch and set up the build for that branch. For this iOS repository, I'm going to say that I want to only manually build it, so I'm going to uncheck build on push, and then I'm also going to set up signing. Now the initial React Native project that was created does not have any signing. So let's head over to Xcode and set up signing first. So on Xcode, we go to our project's properties, and the first thing we do is disable automatic signing. We then select the right team and provisioning profile that we want to use for setting up signing for our application. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the scheme and ensure that I'm building for release instead of debug, because that's what I want in my continuous integration system. I also do not have any Xcode unit tests, so I'm going to uncheck all the test steps that happen during the build process. Now all of these have caused 2 files to change, so let me add them to Git and commit them up. So git push origin master publishes these new changes to GitHub, and let's head back to Mobile Center and continue the setup process. If you wait a minute, you should be able to see the latest commit picked up by Mobile Center. So I'm going to now click on setup branch and continue my setup process. as I said earlier, I'm going to manually want to build it. I don't want to build it on every commit. So I'm going to uncheck build on push. I still do want to run my unit tests. So I'm going to check that. And then I'm going to upload my provisioning profile and certificate that I downloaded from Apple's iTunes store. My certificate has a password, so I'm going to enter that. Once the build is complete, I want to be able to get the build IPA and distribute it to my testers and collaborators. That's the reason I checked the collaborators item there and said that I wanted it to be distributed to all my collaborators. So that was the iOS setup. Let's head over to the Android setup. Android setup is very similar, where I choose the repository that I want to use and the branch. I want to still build the release version of my app, and then in case of Android, I want it to build every time I make a change and commit it to GitHub. So I'm going to leave build on push turned on, and I'm going to set up my key store. Now I don't have a key store that I already created, so I'm going to head over to the terminal and create one. After I enter my details and the username password, I'm going to upload this key store to Mobile Center. So I'm going to just drag and drop the key store file and then type in the password and the key alias for the key store that I just created. Like the iOS application, I want to be able to test this app once it's built on a local device. So I'm going to turn on distribution, and I'm going to say that it needs to be distributed to everyone in the collaborators group. So that's the Android build setup, and with this we have both iOS and Android builds kicked off. If you go look at the iOS build, you can click and drill down into the actual build logs to see what's really happening. Looks like the React Native project is being built, and the first step there was the npm install step. While we are waiting for the build process to complete, I probably should show you this handy little feature. It's the chat bubble on the bottom right. This is a place where you can ask us questions, and you can talk directly with the product team. This is a great way to ensure that all of your questions are answered and that you are never blocked when you're using Mobile Center with your application. We'd love to get your feedback, so please do use this chat button when you are using Mobile Center. Looks like the build is almost done. So while I'm waiting for the build to complete, let me also open up my phone screens, the iPod and an Android emulator. And this is where I'm going to receive the email that tells me that my build is complete, and the email will also have instructions on how to install the application on the phones. I've already logged in with my email address on these phones, so as soon as the build is complete, I should be able to get an email notification. Looks like I just got an email, and that says that my iOS build is complete. So if I go look at the iOS build process, it should say that the build is successful, and I should be able to download the build logs or view the build logs. So that's a successful build, and here's all the information about what happened during the build process. So let's head back to the phone and open up our email and install the app on our iOS device. So that's the email. I click on the see details that has instructions on how to install it. This takes me to Mobile Center's installation page, where I click the install button. Now if I hit the install button there, it starts installing the application on my mobile device. Because this is the first time I'm running an app from this developer, iPhone is going to ask me to trust the developer. So I'm going to hit cancel, go into my settings, and go into my device management tab and ensure that I trust the developer. So there I trust my developer, and then I can go back home and try running the application again. This was the application that we just created by React Native Init, and it's running on my iPhone in the release mode. I just got the email for my Android device, so let me go back to the Android build, and there I should be able to see a successful build. So that's the successful build. Let's head back to our phone and go ahead and install the Android APK. So I click on see details, click on the install button, and that starts downloading the APK file. Once the APK download is complete, I can click on the APK, and that should go ahead and install the application on my device. So I click on install after reading the permissions, the app is installed, and the app starts up. So that's the stock React Native application that I just created that was built on the cloud using Mobile Center and now ready for testing on my devices. Mobile Center also lets you add analytics and crashes. So let's go ahead and look at how do we do this. What I just clicked on was the documentation menu, and it has more instructions about things like pricing, roadmap, etc. It also has information specifically pertaining to analytics and crashes. And if I click on analytics and select the React Native section, it tells me how do I add the SDK to the project and how do I use the SDK. So let's go back to our terminal and run the npm install process. So I'm going to clear everything else from the terminal and say npm install Mobile Center Analytics and Mobile Center crashes. Once the installation is complete, I can run the React Native link command to ensure that all the Java files and all the objective files have appropriate references to the SDKs that I just installed. So when I type in React Native link, it asks me for an Android app secret. So I'm going to copy the Android app secret, and I'm going to say that I want the tracking to be enabled automatically. Alternatively, I could have also used JavaScript for enabling tracking. The other place to find the app secret is the manage app menu. So I'm going to pick up the app secret from there. And for Android also, I want to automatically enable tracking. Once the tracking or the analytics SDK is complete, I'm going to install the crashes SDK. And in case of the crashes SDK, I want the crashes SDK to also kick in automatically whenever a crash happens. So once the SDKs are integrated, let's go into our source code and start using these SDKs. Because I have an Android and an iOS app and I want to reuse my logic, I'm going to create a single index.js file, and the starting file for both iOS and the Android projects is going to refer to this index.js file. I just say require index.js in both of these index.ios.js and index.android.js files. So once that's done, I can write all of my logic in index.js and reuse it. So let me go ahead and include the button and create 3 buttons. The first button is going to be for analytics. Whenever the button is clicked, I'm going to send a custom event to our backend server. So I'm going to create a button that says send event, and on pressing the button, the method send event is going to get called. The definition of send event is super simple. I just say analytics.track event, and Visual Studio Code here automatically gives you help and IntelliSense by which it tells you what parameters the method takes. So I'm going to fill in the name of the event and a custom property. Next, I'm going to import the crashes SDK by saying import crashes from Mobile Center crashes, and then create 2 buttons. The first button is going to simulate a native crash. In a real world application, you probably wouldn't have this button. The second button that I'm going to use with crashes is to try and catch any uncaught JavaScript exceptions. So to simulate a native crash for testing, I'm just going to generate a test crash. For the JavaScript crash, however, I want to make the stack trace a little bit deeper. So I'm going to make the JS crash function call a couple of other functions, say function 1, function 2, function 3, etc. And then the final function will throw an uncaught JavaScript exception. Now, there could be different reasons why the JavaScript exception is thrown. It could be because of an explicit error, or it could be because of a divide by 0, or calling a method on an undefined or a null object. All of these will result in the application to crash, and the Mobile Center Crashes SDK can catch all of them and show us the exact stack traces for us to debug the issue. Because I now have a single index.js file, let's go ahead and also update the jest tests so that we just refer to the main index.js file. If you run the tests now, it's probably going to fail. This is because some of the SDKs may include ES6 and Jest does not automatically compile them. To ensure that Jest compiles all the required test cases, we need to add a new key called transform ignore patterns, and that's what I'm doing here. This should fix our tests. Let's go ahead and also install the CodePush SDK. As Ryan was saying, CodePush is a great way to update apps instantly over the air. I already have the CodePush CLI installed on my system. So I'm going to go ahead and create new apps on CodePush, one for iOS and the other one for Android. Each of these apps also has a specific deployment key, and when using the React Native link process, we will be able to input these deployment keys in our application. So I enter the deployment key for Android, and then the deployment key for iOS. If you look at the changes, these were the changes that were made by the CodePush React Native link command. Let's go back to our source code and import the CodePush SDK. Let's also go ahead and add one button that starts the CodePush sync process. So I'm going to call the button CodePush, and then on pressing it, we are going to call a method called CodePush sync. The CodePush sync method is going to invoke CodePush.sync, and it will show us a dialog box when an update is available. And I'm also going to ensure that I will be able to install the update as soon as the update is available. As you could see, VS Code was able to give me all the contextual help that I needed for CodePush. While the update happens, I also want to display the state of the update. So I'm going to create a new state variable in this component called logs. Let's also display the logs state variable inside our main render method. And finally, inside the CodePush.sync's callback, we can update the state variable to display whatever the latest state is. So I'm simply going to iterate through the different states and append whatever the latest state is. When the CodePush button is clicked, let's also add a log that says that the sync started. So let's save these changes and commit all of the changes that we made while adding the Mobile Center SDKs to Git. So I'm going to go into Visual Studio Code that has support for Git and enter my commit message. We can also go back to the command line and push all of these changes over to GitHub. As soon as I push these changes to GitHub, Android, which was set up so that it starts the build process on a new commit, will automatically pick up this commit, and if I go to build, I should see that the new build is queued. So that's the new build that got automatically queued because it got a new commit from GitHub. On iOS, however, I had said that I wanted to always manually build. So I can go into the build configuration and toggle it on and off in the middle of a setup, and I should be perfectly fine. So I'm going to apply my changes, and this will kick off the iOS build also. As soon as the build for Android or iOS completes, we will get an email that tells us that we have a new version available and we can go ahead and install the new versions. So let's just go ahead and wait for the emails. And looks like the Android build just completed. So let me head over to my Android device and resync my email and open the email that tells me that the Android build is available. Just like the last time, I can click on the See Details button, head over to Mobile Center on my mobile phone, and click on Install. Here it says that I have a new version available, and this time it's not going to ask me for any permissions because I didn't change anything related to permissions in my application. So I can click on the application and say Install, and with this I should have all the new buttons that I just added in my application. So if I open the app, I'll see the 4 buttons that I created. Let's go ahead and click the buttons. The first one for sending an event, the second one for a JavaScript crash, and the third button for starting the CodePush sync. So let me restart the application because it crashed, and then click on CodePush sync to see details and check if there's an update. Because we haven't published any updates, CodePush says that it is up to date. On the iOS phone, looks like I got another email telling me that the iOS build was ready. So let me go ahead and install the iOS build. So I go to Mobile Center's install page and click on install, head back to home, and then I can start the app as soon as it's ready. Because I have already trusted the developer, I can run it without any hiccups. So even on iOS, I now see the 4 buttons, so let's start clicking them. The second button there was for a native crash, the third button for a JavaScript crash, and the final button to see if there's any CodePush sync. So here I have on my Android and my iOS device the news or the second version of the build that we just created. Now if I go over to distribute and click on releases, I'll be able to see the 2 releases that I just installed on my phones. Heading over to the crashes section, I will be able to see information about the native and the JavaScript crash. I also have graphs telling me the total number of crashes, the devices on which it crashed, and the actual crash information. Let me click on the native crash, and I should be able to see the native stack trace. We also see information about the device type that caused the crash and can drill in deeper and try to understand what exactly caused the crash. Mobile Center also has case management, and I can go ahead and close or ignore this crash if I think that this is something I've taken care of. Let's now look at the JavaScript crash. This is something that's very specific for React Native, and in case of a JavaScript crash, I actually get stack traces of my JavaScript source. All of these are also mapped to real sources using source maps that were generated during the build process. So if I had to open up VS Code and look at my source code, the line numbers displayed in the crashes will correspond directly to the places where the actual methods were called. This is very useful because this lets me debug my JavaScript code right away. The source maps for my React Native application were automatically generated during the build process, and that's the reason why I'm able to see this correspondence not just in a JavaScript bundle file, but in the actual source code. So there is a one-to-one mapping to the lines where the exact crash happened. If you use a custom build server like Jenkins and just want to use the crashes service from Mobile Center, you can manually upload the symbols and the source maps to the crashes service. Here's where you upload the dsym file and the source maps. If you head over to the build service and look at a completed build, you will be able to download not just the IPA, but also the symbols and the source maps. Let us now head over to the analytics section. Analytics gives us information like active users, daily users, session length, geographical locations, device types, etc. You can also head over to events to see the exact custom events that were sent over. You can drill deeper into the kind of devices and the location where these custom events were sent from. To quickly take a look at all the things that happened during the analytics workflow, you can look at the log flow section. Specifically to React Native, we are also working on integrating analytics with React Native's new navigation system. This way, you'll have automatic page tracking with React Native applications. The dashboards on the Android application tell us a very similar story. Here, I can view the crashes and the analytics. Finally, let's head back to our terminal and release an update that contains just JavaScript changes using CodePush. So I'm going to go into my code and make a couple of changes in my index.js file. First, I'm going to add a text that says that this change was made using CodePush. We can also add styling to that text. I'm going to go ahead and add a custom font size and align the text to center. The way the CodePush sync logs were displayed also wasn't great. So let's actually get rid of the text and have one text field for every single log message. So I'm going to just map over the state.logs variable and have one text field per log message. Let's go ahead and save this file and commit it in the CodePush branch. Note that the CodePush branch was not set up for automatic builds. So now I go back and push all the changes to GitHub, but Mobile Center is not going to build anything because the CodePush branch was not set up. Let's now use the CodePush command line tool to make a CodePush release. So I'm going to say CodePush release React iOS. The CodePush bundle for iOS is being created, and once it's complete, let's go ahead and also create a new release for the Android application. Though we are using the command line right now, Our team is working on integrating CodePush into Mobile Center so that these commands can automatically be run on branches without having to run them manually through the terminal. If I quit my VS Code and go back to the phones, I can hit the CodePush sync button and I should be able to see the new changes. If you notice, I didn't have to explicitly reinstall the application. So there's a new change available for Android, and as you can see, the changes with CodePush show up. The log messages also look pretty thanks to the change that we just made. The rest of the buttons work as they were. Let's go back to the terminal and use the CodePush CLI to look at the installation metrics. I can look at the different apps that I have available and the deployment for each app. So for the iOS app, you can see that the staging app was installed once. We can run a similar command for the Android app. CodePush also gives you functionality to roll out updates to a percentage of users and even roll back updates in case of errors. We continue to work on exciting new features for Mobile Center, and Ryan is going to describe some of the new things that are going to come up in the future.
All right, cool. So we've seen what you can do today. Let's find out what you can do tomorrow. Mobile Center is in active development. We're actually in preview mode today, or beta, as the kids are saying. And so that means that new features are rolling out on practically a weekly basis. Particularly in the React Native space, there's a lot of exciting stuff that's happening, and there's going to be a lot of change over the course of the next 3 to 5 months. So Parachute already showed you how you can distribute based upon a particular branch. The exact same capability will be exposed in Mobile Center through CodePush as well. We're also looking at adding in a bunch of SDKs for different cloud services, like authentication through Facebook and Google and LinkedIn and the like, push notifications, and cloud-based storage as well, right? So here we've got a kind of essentially SQL-based storage in the cloud with online-offline synchronization capabilities. And then finally, you also got a quick peek at what it means to do automated UI testing. But what we found is that a lot of React Native developers don't prefer working with the scripting languages that define those UI tests. Things like Appium or Calabash require you to kind of get a little too deep into the internals of the native side. And so what we want to do is expose a scripting language that allows you to write tests in languages, or at least frameworks, that feel natural to React Native developers. Things like Enzyme or Jest. So lots and lots of cool stuff to come in the next couple of months, and we think that you guys will dig it. All right, if you want to get started today, real easy, go to aka.ms, whack Mobile Center. You can sign up with GitHub, create your own email address and password, however you want to do it, but take your React Native project with you. React Native, we also support Objective-C, Swift, Java, Xamarin, you name it, we've got it. Cordova support coming in the future. And then if you have any questions, consult documentation or reach out to us. Documentation is available at aka.ms, whack Mobile Center docs. There are a number of other webinars, excellent webinars that were recorded as part of this series. Go check those out. Or, as Parachute showed you, in the bottom right-hand corner of Mobile Center, at any point you can click on Intercom and be connected directly with one of our engineers or product managers. We'll try to get back to you real quick and help you get started. Thanks so much. Really, really had a great time. Thank you so much.